Good morning, everyone. This is the Vermont House Committee on Commerce and Economic Development. It is Wednesday, April 23rd, 2025 at 10:27 in the morning. Back from the extended break. I think right now we'll just have some committee discussion on all the things that we've heard on the CHIP program, the TIF, what we just heard from Ellen. That integrates. So maybe be good for us to start at a place of what we're thinking, maybe what the next draft is going to bring. Makes sense. And I guess we can walk through a little bit of what we're thinking about. Probably going to forget some stuff, but do you want to
Take us through.
take us through? You've got all the notes.
Yes, our notes are. So one of the pieces is tier 2 to not be eligible. That, so I guess some of it is, how do we make sure that we get something that can pass the House, right? And some of it is, how do we put something together that works with existing law, like we just saw, right? And so we're trying to do both of those things.
Yeah. Just to, maybe back up a little bit. So we've been having conversations, with Edie and Abby. We've sat down with people from Ways and Means, Charlie, Kimball, Bridget, and with Marty Belfast. And we had conversations. We met on Zoom Monday night, started talking about this. Also had some conversations with Chair Sheldon in the Environment Committee, because some of this intersects as well, especially with here. So I think one thing we've heard from them specifically is that tier 2 should absolutely not be in this right now. And I think we've got to start someplace. So I think that's one place where we're going to start is pull back on tier 1A and 1B are eligible. Right now, we're staying away from 2 until we have a better idea of how this whole thing is going to work. And I think down the road, look at that tier 2 area too, if it's needed.
So part of that discussion this morning is what is available in 1A and 1B and all of the areas that are exempted until 1A and 1B become the areas that the state has designated. And I think that was pretty illuminating. It was, at least for me, that there is more available in 1A and 1B than it originally appeared. And I don't know if others feel the same or not, but I think that's a conversation to have.
I took away a different message from that conversation about Act 181. I'm on the Regional Planning Commission, so I'm pretty familiar with what's going on there. And I wasn't hearing Ellen's testimony as saying that you couldn't build housing in tier 2. In fact, the elements of the regional plan, specifically have these future land use areas. And like she said, tier 2 is a lot of the state. And especially in some of these rural towns, 1B doesn't really cover a whole lot.
I think you're misunderstanding something that I said. So I just want to back up a quick, because we're not talking about where you should or shouldn't be building housing. We're talking about CHIP
I understand.
and how we can limit CHIP in a way that will pass the House.
Yeah, but I'm trying to talk about the narrative that I think people are getting around. Well, 1B is plenty. That's where we can
We don't know. Actually, we don't know. I think you may be correct that 1B is not enough. 1A is not enough. But I think in order to get CHIP off the ground, we need to start at a place where people feel more comfortable.
Yeah.
And then if we need to expand it because we're not getting enough out of one A, one B,
Yeah.
then we have those conversations.
I understand that issue, okay, as opposed to, should there be limitations or disincentives really for housing in tier two? That's a policy and sort of a factual thing. But I do get if other committees are putting pressure on us to say, don't include tier two. I mean, the only thing I would say would be, this program is the first hopeful thing that I've seen around housing for years in the rural parts of the state. So taking tier two out of the program would be tremendously disappointing. And I think, there's just all sorts of assumptions and narratives about why that should be. That's really difficult because, we're talking in this committee, but I haven't had conversations with other people who say that's a bad idea. So I haven't been able to talk to them.
But we asked Abby to sit in yesterday. They had conversations with Ellen like we did today. And what their reaction was.
Yeah, their reaction was quite concerned about tier two being in there.
Did they say why they concerned?
It was not an in-depth conversation. But their initial reaction was that I think there have to be a lot of work to get them to be comfortable with tier two being part of it.
Who's they?
I think the environment committee. After the committee meeting, I had an offline conversation with someone on the committee who said, they didn't see any way that would make it through their committee to have tier two part of it. She could imagine there could be a process for an exemption, like where you could apply to use it in tier two, but that was her political judgment of the committee.
Just having discussions.
Start with something easier.
It's a big nut,
Okay.
so.
So when you say that the committee itself was not overly supportive of the tier two, is that the leadership of the committee or don't? Okay.
No,
Yeah, the reaction I saw in the committee, in particular from the leadership of the committee, was a lot of concern of having tier two be part of it.
in the whole committee. So.
It was the whole committee that felt that way.
They didn't do a straw poll, they didn't do a vote, that was my takeaway from it, and it wasn't, they took the testimony, I explained, the bill, and they asked me questions about the CHIP program. But their initial reaction was that they would be concerned about tier two being part of it.
Can I just add, is this mostly having to do with like being in alignment with building philosophy?
I think so.
Like, that the
100%.
worry is that if we include tier two, that will get into a sprawling situation that we are literally trying to avoid at the moment.
100%.
Okay.
And so last session, there was a concerted effort, and Dave, I'm sorry, I'm talking, wave your hand is up, but there was a concerted effort to get buy-in from the legislature that we would have a statewide development policy, and that this Act 181 would be the framework for that. And so if we're gonna have a policy where we have towns say, this is where I want the building to happen, and I'm gonna designate, because every single town can designate 1B areas, then we should be supporting that through the rest of our laws and not working against laws that we pass, right? To build into the future. So that's the philosophy.
And I think what we heard from Ellen, 2B is still requires that 250.
Yeah, two would not, two,
Tier two,
tier two does not have any
There's
kind
no
of
change.
exemption.
Right.
Yeah.
So
no
it's-
change in
Right,
jurisdiction.
and
Right.
so as I think, the thinking is if we create this new chip program, that it's centered on making things pencil out, helping things pencil out. So the things that are gonna help make it pencil out are no Act 250 permitting fees, that whole that uncertain process that they go through, and that this will help, along with CHIP, will help bring more housing into the 1A, 1B areas. Think I can see a place for it down the road, but I think until people feel more comfortable, it's not in this committee, but outside of this committee, feel more comfortable on how CHIP works. I think that's probably what's gonna happen, but I don't know. Dave?
Okay, I understand, I appreciate that additional explanation, actually, Edie. Was there also a concern that this might be so widespread in tier two areas that it could have a significant negative effect on funds going into the education fund initially?
100%, yes. Right, because without some guardrails, we keep talking about this, without some guardrails, it's really hard to understand the short term. Yes, impact.
Don't have to bother to raise your hands, just having discussion.
Yeah, I didn't want to just, I wanted to give everybody an opportunity to
All at the same time.
dip in again. So a few things. I could appreciate the concern around the ed fund losing money if you, number one, didn't have guardrails around what you were intending this for. And if you believed that there was going to be a lot of, these are towns that don't have any house. And so there's just a disconnect from my thinking, well, how is this going to hurt the ed fund? There's no housing going on. So I don't get that part of it. The other concern I have is that we talked a lot this morning, and Ellen helped us out understanding the different tiers. But what I tried to inject into that conversation is that that's not the only thing that's going on with Act 181. The other part that's going on is the regional planning commissions identifying future land use areas in a manner that's kind of different than the way they have been. And these future land use areas say some stuff about housing. And they allow housing, they recognize that housing is going to be built outside of, tier 1A and 1B. So I don't understand the thought that somehow by including tier 2 in the program, we're being inconsistent with Act 181, because ultimately all these municipal plans are going to have to be in conformance with the regional plan, and the regional plan has some, they've adopted a methodology statewide for how this is going to be mapped out and what towns are going to have to do in terms of limiting housing, encouraging housing outside of the tier 1 and 1A and 1B. So I just don't understand the policy. I don't understand the policy argument from excluding tier 2. I really don't. I understand political issue of ain't gonna happen. I understand that one, although that makes me really frustrated because we haven't had an opportunity to debate that issue. We're just kind of debating amongst the choir in terms of the value of the CHIP program, and we haven't had an opportunity to debate with other folks to try to work something out. So that's pretty frustrating. there we go on it. The rant for the day.
Well, I'm just gonna ask, are you vocalizing from a town that is not gonna designate any areas as one B?
No, of course, no. We have in each of the four towns that I represent, we have designated village centers, areas. I can't remember. So those exist.
But there's more opportunity, right?
One B is more than that.
Well, I understand. It's a little bit more. It's not much. I mean, I've seen the maps that are being proposed for the towns, and they really don't expand the area that would be either at the village center, village area, even combined, it's pretty small here.
Yeah, but one B is not that. One B is different from that, which is why we had Ellen come in and talk about that this morning.
Well, I understand, but there's still boundaries. Okay, there's still geographic areas that are going to be mapped and approved by the Land Use Review Board. And I've seen what the Regional Planning Commission had, you probably have too, what they propose. And it's not a whole lot different than what our existing village centers are.
I mean, here's my concern. I'm just looking at the different things here. I understand, and of course, I'm in a big town, so it's never going to be an issue for us. What I'm worried about is kind of a catch-22 here, because we talk about if we exclude this from tier 2. All right, I'm looking at the requirements here for tier 1B5 is the municipality has a water supply, wastewater infrastructure, or soils that can accommodate a community system. Well, in order for them to be tier 1B, they need to have some system like this, but the level of funding that may be required to do that, that's exactly what CHIP was designed to do. So I don't see how are they going to get to tier 1B if they don't have the funding, and this one mechanism we're coming up with CHIP that would give them the funding they can't take advantage of.
So if they have soils, they're eligible.
Yeah, right. They don't need a system.
And so
just
they
need
could
solar.
use that to be one B and either connect town water if there is town water or build a community septic. And this funding would allow them to build the community septic.
Well, the funding, yes, but the thing is, they can't get the funding because they're not tier 1B, they're tier 2.
They have soils.
So they could.
They don't have to have the system.
Well, if they're 2B, they've got to go through Act 250.
Right.
Which is.
It's gonna be
No,
more.
Two, not A, B, just two.
Frankly, I'm not so concerned about Act 250 exemption or not. Most of the projects that are going to happen in some of these rural towns are going to be under 10. Anyway, that's just the nature of these towns. So.
Yeah, and that's my concern with the tier 2 is, we're eliminating 90% of the people that really could use this program. I mean, I live in a town of almost 11,000 people. I mean, we've taken advantage of TIF. So for us to get financing for these infrastructure programs isn't going to be as big a problem as for one of your towns,
Yeah, I guess I would say for me, I can understand the need actually to go kind of conservative and slow and start with what we have and to see what we have and to grow. And I think for me, that's actually where I'm getting a little bit hitched up. And if anybody can point me in this where I'm missing it, I'm concerned about maintenance in low density areas that are already having systems that are like failing and having a hard time staying alive, just because that means that we will continue to lose housing stock out the other end. And then also and I think the same is true also in our village centers, that we don't have a lot of, and I'm not seeing it in here, that maintenance of existing systems is something that we could be prioritizing. Or also possible expansion of existing systems.
So more about.
Infrastructure includes expansion.
It does
Yeah.
includes
Yes.
expansion
Yes. And connection to.
and connection too.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
But I think your email.
Yeah.
On USDA
Yeah,
rule, what's going on there
that's a big one.
is really big. When you start talking about wastewater expansion, you're talking about big dollars. And I think $2 million a mile.
You're referring to what USDA?
So,
USDA rule
yeah.
development.
I'm sorry.
So, yeah, sorry, I talked with Liz Royer at the Vermont Rural Wastewater Association. And she was explaining that the USDA is looking at basically slashing a lot of rural development funding, and they can
Yeah.
slash the office, and we know that. So one thing that happens there is that sort of like guaranteed base funding that helps us build the stack is going away. And our stack is becoming what I have now referred to as crepes instead of fluffy pancakes. So that becomes a concern. And then also the fact that they, wait, did I lose my train of thought? Oh, they'll come back. That the rural, Mike, help me. I lost my train of thought. The $2 million a mile. So she was talking about the sustainability fund and was talking to some engineers, and they basically laughed her out of the room and said it costs $2 million a mile to add wastewater. The $9 million that we have in the pot is not going to touch that. So, and then my thought is like, and it's always a balance between the maintenance costs and new costs, but if the costs are what they are, where are we going to get this sort of guaranteed base funding to build our stack?
And so their comment is saying that you're pointing out a headwind that would frustrate any kind of housing development, no matter what.
Yes,
Yes,
yes.
agreed. That, yeah,
Which also, I guess to say it would put probably some really natural limits on how this program is going to be able to get used.
yeah.
One last comment. Over the past, I don't know, how many years, 5 years or so, there's been a concerted effort to limit place restrictions or somehow limit housing in rural Vermont. Going back to some of the, 60-40 or 50-50, I can't remember. And some Act 1A1 provisions that I think are limiting for housing in rural Vermont. And there should be the, like strike through of the legislature saying, we don't want housing in rural Vermont. And I think we need housing everywhere. I mean, I think we're in the depth of a real big crisis. And for the life of me, I don't understand why we wouldn't try to think as big as possible about how to address that crisis. And on the other side of the coin, if we don't include tier 2, I think the alienation is going to be even more in rural areas of the state. That's not good. That's not healthy for a society. That worries me too. There we go.
Yeah, I think we see things through the lenses maybe of jurisdiction as committee members, and we see them through the lenses of representation, with our communities. And sometimes through the lens of a caucus. But, it does feel, I'm nervous about the implication, I guess, along with Herb, that, that you're not ready yet, that this implies. We don't trust you. We don't trust your community or your select boards. There's already Act 250 with the forthcoming tier 2s, which is no walk in the park. And I do think, what is that? Dillon's state, home rule state. I think that someone had mentioned that we are Dylan, so the communities really only have the powers that are delegated to them by the state. So in a way, this is consistent with that if the legislature is to say like, not you, Panton, or something like that, they can't do much about it. But the headwinds are, I mean, the numbers are batty about how many new starts we have for housing structures. In the Act 250 exemptions, some of the quick reporting has been kind of encouraging. It's like, 40 units on a vacant lot. Like, that's good to see. But I understand maybe other committees needing some time to sort of socialize the idea and think it through and right size the concern that it has, the shadow that it casts with the size of the thing that the light is shining off of. So I'm happy to keep sort of talking about it and articulating and talking more. Maybe everybody everywhere already knows all the issues that we've been talking about, and because everyone's been talking about in Vermont for years now. But it does seem like there is no Wild West for housing development that's forthcoming. And certainly I think just from a likeliest standpoint, the towns, the cities that are ready to go with projects that are already in development or could, that are farther along will see more uptake at first. But if anything, maybe we get to have some learning as things filter down to our other communities. But, maybe there's some belief that the tier two element should come in after a year or something like that. But the timetable doesn't seem to necessarily mean that hammers are swinging in a sprawl manner immediately, because I think that would be very difficult to put through regional planning goals, town plans, etc. I'm not sure I see the anxiety.
I think there's also just sort of that, and I mean, I guess I'll just cop to feeling it, that real anxiety of like, are the resources, is the enthusiasm, is all that stuff going to dry up before it gets to the rural parts of the city?
Can I ask a question on the exemptions? Because none of the 1A, 1B goes into effect until 27. How to be exempted? I mean, I am rural Vermont where I live, but it's very different on what my towns are gonna consider. One will consider building, one won't. Neither has shown any excitement for moving forward with projects. So, it's whatever, right? Totally. But how do the current exemptions until 1A and 1B go into effect impact the areas that you're concerned about?
I don't think it impact, you mean, so the tier 1A, 1B don't come into effect until, I think, December.
27.
Yeah, January 27 or something.
At the earliest.
I think that's, and you're talking about in
1B.
terms of 127?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's
So are there
why,
opportunities for the towns that are ready
Yeah.
right now
yeah,
to use this
correct.
because
It-
it's built in?
If it includes,
The current exempted areas.
well, that's where I think it's important not to distinguish between the Act 250 exemptions and, the CHIP program. Because there are going to be areas in a rural town that might be eligible for exemptions because you remember it's an or, it's either 1A, 1B, or those areas might be eligible for the CHIP program, even though the tier boundaries haven't been established. Right? So the issue in my mind is, so how, we're still having all this land use planning going on right now. Regional planning commissions are going to set some stuff. The municipalities are going to pretty much have to throw the line. They'll be back and forth, but the basic framework is set, by Act 1A1. So in my mind, I lost the train of thought in terms of what your concern was or what your question was. I don't see any incompatibility in the bill as drafted now and Act 1A1, because I think all these processes go into effect And as soon as the 127 is enacted, if it includes tier 2, or even if it doesn't, all that's going to go in place come the effective date of 127, notwithstanding that the boundaries have been established. And I don't see
think I
anything
asked
wrong
my
with that.
question very well.
What's that?
I don't think I asked my question very well.
I'm sorry.
The 250 exemption map, that there's a couple little pockets in my region, in my district, where there's likely exemptions, or, a few towns are shut out from that fully. So I think, and no construction is happening there in any spot in any of the towns, in pockets of those towns that are 250 exempts at this moment.
So you have towns that don't have any activity exemption at all, like they don't have any, or what are designated, they don't have any designated.
That's right. And it's like 600 people live in those towns combined. So, it's not shocking.
Yeah, a couple of my towns are also running up.
Yeah, they don't have
Because
no
because of
designated
the
areas.
full designation thing, yeah.
Yeah, like 3 of my 4 towns are literally river, a few buildings, mountain. And so, I mean, that's, the tier 1, A or B, there's no place to go. And so there's just no place to go. And so unless you went into what would be considered tier 2.
But so outside of those, there are still 2 theoretical to be determined tier 2 areas.
There are probably some, I mean, there's still a lot of mountains.
Yeah.
And national and state forests around it.
Sure.
There isn't much
If they went
space, but at least there's some space that would be tier 2.
density, it is interesting to see like up to 50 units. And it's like, dude, who's gonna imagine popping 50 units into Reedsboro? I love the idea. And it would be, but I'm a little bit, it's an interesting thing to consider. And that those are in fact places where the houses are it's not quite cheek to jowl, but you're in a place now. And, there's still a lot of I think we have had a lot of, important conversations around guardrails, and I see them. I have never been able to conceive of Vermont as a place without good guardrails. I think we have them, and I think we see that they're robust, and so yeah.
So we have guardrails on housing, right? We're looking at a new program that municipalities can access statewide money or access funds that wouldn't be distributed statewide, right? So if I'm going to draw the line where the line is. And whether you see the program this way or not, our colleagues do. So we need to be able to look at this from not only our own perspective, but other perspectives as well. And we have to be able to, if it is important to us to get some kind of program that will allow funding for infrastructure for more development, right? So if that's important to us to get that across the line, what are the guardrails that make sense to do? Is that a different way of thinking about this?
Yeah, maybe a tier 2 in the language in the bill is excluded for the first. There's an idea like it comes in later on. We have a chance to see how this thing looks. Is it operational? And then you let the RPCs finish their work with the mapping, which I think at one of our joint sessions, maybe, I think one of the VAPTA folks said, please let us finish this. Let's not alter the timetable. We're on pace. We'll have it, and everyone will be speaking the same language around the state. And so, it could be that so there's an opportunity. I don't know if that's an option. The exclusion option seems like that's a possibility. Is there a phasing it in option that would also be relevant to people who have some concerns about, pedal down, going at it across the state?
I think that's valid. We've done that, You know, I mean, we already have intent about reporting and stuff like that. Could we add language in there sort of to keep the momentum going, saying that maybe we'll get a study back or something like that on how this program would impact that tier two, make it not allowed in this iteration, but include some language that we're gonna study you allowing it in the tier two areas.
I'm gonna take a different stance here. It came over from the Senate and that, you know, I think somebody said it a long time ago, 76-16-1. I think we got the one. We obviously have the 16 because the Senate sent it over to us. We just need to find the 76 here in the House. And if the problem is a, you know, I listening to what we have here going on, which is a very bipartisan group, you know, the question is, would we be okay moving this out as the Senate version? And if we're okay as a group doing that, is it possible that there's enough people on the floor that would also support that to get it to the governor's desk?
Well, number
And-
one, we don't have possession of the bill.
Correct, valid point.
Number two, the committees that. So once we do our work, it goes into 127. So then they vote it out, then it goes upstairs. It can also make environment can ask for it. And so it's got places it has to go. And I can guarantee you that there'll be changes from what the work that we've done. So we can do our best work. We're running out of time. And so I just would ask everyone to think about it. I mean, we can, if the committee so chooses, we can keep tier two in. But I guarantee you it's gonna get stripped out somewhere. We can put in some language that allows tier two to go into effect in a year later. There's different things we can do, but ultimately we don't have possession. It's not our bill. We're just doing some of the policy work on it.
And I think there's a point to that with like triggering. I mean, if environment realizes we don't strip out tier two, they may be all that much more motivated to say, yeah, we want that bill. Whereas if we do strip it out or delay it for a year, maybe they'll say, you know what, it's not worth.
But based on your report, they're gonna want that bill anyway so that they can stuff it on the wall.
No.
No? Oh, okay,
All good stuff, no. It's-
okay.
My
No, I
comment was that their initial reaction was real concerns about having tier two in there. I mean, from my perspective, like if I could just like, you know, wave a magic wand, my preference would be to put out a bill that is more expansive, that includes tier two, that has a lot of intent, but not a ton of guardrails, knowing that in a year we can bring it back. I do think that our housing crisis is that so severe that we need to put out everything we can. But I also understand the political considerations, and that I think it's the most important thing is that something comes out the other end. And I think that if we leave tier two in, I would imagine that environment will want to review it. I don't know that, but
we'll have to have those conversations.
we're gonna have those conversations, and I know that, you know, there's concerns and ways and means about it. So I mean, it's an interesting conundrum where like the policy and the politics, right? Like don't align necessarily.
Environment actually will get possession of the bill because of other sections.
Okay,
So
gotcha. Oh, yeah, they were taking testimony on other sections when I went over there. So they will see.
It's fair to know that tier two also triggers Act 250.
Yeah, for
Like,
sure.
It's not just like a
Yeah,
clear
yeah.
path and runway.
That's why I'm
That's
comfortable
why I'm comfortable
that
with
there's
it too.
plenty of, there's the planning, there's Act 250, there, we have our
Yeah, it has a ton
land
of,
use policy, yeah.
yeah.
why are
So
we
there's
putting?
there's a lot of headwinds blowing that are pushing back against everything we're trying to do.
Yeah.
And it's not just political, well, it is, but there's federal political too.
Yeah.
Money is drying up, and even with a chip program, it may not even work for anybody.
Exactly.
Because
Yeah,
there's,
right.
it just, without that stack of dollars coming.
Yeah.
Things may not pencil out, and interest rates are still up there and it doesn't look like they're gonna come down anytime soon. So there's a lot of headwinds right now. We don't know what things will be in another year. But yeah, so it's hard to tell how soon this could get off the ground, if it ever does.
Has anyone talked, I mean, my understanding, general housing has possession of the bill, correct?
Yeah.
Now, has anyone gotten any feedback from them about this whole tier 2 thing?
That's pretty much, they've kicked this piece to us, to do the policy work on. And I know they'll have to look at what environment says too. Once it leaves them, it's gone, and then go upstairs, and Amy could ask for it, and it could go to environment too, but we're getting down to the nitty gritty where things have to happen, and things have to get moved.
I guess they're gonna put whatever restrictions they want on. And
What I'm saying is, I mean, do we do our best work and send it out, and whatever happens, happens?
But I-
Maybe, but do we try to get something that they don't have to make a lot of changes on, that takes less time to get this bill moving and get it back over to the Senate?
And also, does that give us another year to like continue to have these conversations, to like massage the tier 2 issue? The maps hopefully will be in by then. We'll have a better assessment of what's going on.
Is the delay
So,
palatable?
Just to ask the question, Emily, are you saying keep working on it next session, or are you saying get something into law that can be modified?
I
Because
think
once
once something into law that can be modified.
Just wanted to be really clear on that,
Yes.
because once something, if it delays till next session, it will be less likely. to
Yeah, I don't want it-
happen At all.
I don't want to delay
There's
it. I
momentum, right?
think we gotta get it through, but I think it's just something that we can continue to tweak and modify.
The question I'm trying to just make sure I get it is, what's your gut feeling on, or your read on tier 2 eligibility being delayed by some length of time? Is that,
I don't know, I mean, I was thinking the same thing you were thinking. Herb was talking, is how can we keep it, but delay it until we have
Yeah.
better information of how
What the-
chip is gonna work, what the activity is, how much is gonna be pulled out, we don't know. All the other issues that are going on with federal dollars not being available for the stack, and is anything gonna work? So,
and Herbert, that gives us an opportunity to have our rural towns
and whether or not they're gonna
spend a year
I
saying,
would be interested, but I guess, I think I'd want to understand better what the issue is for environment. Wanting tier 2 in.
Yeah.
In part, has to be part of CHIP.
Right.
And is it
And-
because it has to go through Act 250. I don't know, that's a question.
Yeah, and that's why I'd really be interested to know why, they had that strong, sounds like a fairly strong reaction against it, because there's the boundary stuff, but there are also all these regional planning required by law that I think was intended by the environmental committees in both the Senate and the House to deal with some of the issues. And I don't know why those other provisions, that we're not changing those. And I don't know why those aren't sufficient to meet environment's concern. Now, the Ed Fund is different, and I could imagine constructing, guardrails around tier 2 that sort of recognize, what's the grand list growth have been, over the past whatever years, to assure the Ed Fund people that they're not going to be hurt. I could imagine, but I don't know, without having a conversation or a joint hearing, something, it's hard to get a sense of what you could do to address the concerns that they have.
I can tell you, if we want to avoid the fallacy of hurting the ed fund. I'm going to say it that way. We could put that original taxable value that just goes up with the general municipal rate. And that would mean that, so, you know, a blank property that they're going to be doing some development on, we just pretend that the development doesn't exist, but the property value still goes up. And that would completely remove that concern of the general ed or the ed fund. And if somebody's complaining about it at that point, they just don't like TIF. That's right. Do I sound like I'm being aggressive towards you? I'm not. I'm being aggressive towards people that don't like TIF.
I mean, that is the prescribed solution to dealing with the ed fund thing.
Right.
To give the access to the ed fund.
Correct. And it's if we were to do that, the argument, you can make that argument, but the argument it's not valid. It's just not valid.
Then drop another bomb.
Sure. The what bomb?
Another one.
Okay.
So other restrictions, instead of having infrastructure as improvements with that gigantic list, what if it's a list that is very clear, that is stormwater, sewer, sidewalks, roads, you know, whatever we specifically think should be funded, and not just anything that anybody thinks is improvements as a.
I would have a huge problem with that because of the flood mitigation side of things.
That's part of improvement.
We need
Right.
brownfield.
Well, not if
Brownfield.
we're bringing up buildings.
I guess I don't,
That's
See a
the
problem
rate
with
that
that.
was,
Right.
and then, well, how is
That's not the
that?
fund, is flood mitigation.
Yeah, that's
It is-
the
but
fund
it
is flood mitigation.
But it's okay. As long as we maintain the ability to raise people up,
what is,
I don't know why, what's the concern that wouldn't be flood mitigation?
because it's not public infrastructure.
Oh, because you're doing a private house.
It's a private house, yeah.
I tend to think every project is gonna be unique, and so a more expansive list is better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, but no, you're,
Municipality, right? We're working with the developer
It's
to,
also infrastructure.
if the issue is brownfields, if the issue is, I mean, there might be a thing or two on that list that
she was saying,
could be pulled, but
I'm fine.
you were saying you were wanting to
That's not-
restrict it, correct,
that's
Edie?
not a- It's not a specific list, it's all expansive.
Page 26.
That means
Page
that,
26,
that means that,
oh, those are just
that means
examples.
that Betsy has
right.
to do rulemaking. And people can bring up, well, you know, you did this, you could do this too.
Right.
You know, but
But there's the municipality also is in that, right, is determining like, this is a public good for our community.
But the bomb that you were dropping was making the list smaller, correct?
Just more, just.
So right now,
specific.
right now,
Specific.
Right,
it
which,
says
no.
improvements means these things, but it is not, it is a list of ideas of what it could mean.
Right.
It is not a list of only the things that would fit.
Right.
What we would say is improvement means only these things, and we would choose the things that it means.
right. But that gets into the concern that I have where it could, I mean,
Situations.
I like it nice and broad.
But I think the section 1907 that refers to,
that's.
the section of 1907 that refers to is the purpose.
Speak once at one.
Oh,
Yeah, so I don't have any problem with looking at the definition of improvement. From what I'm hearing, that's not going to be enough to address the concerns of other committees around housing in tier 2. I mean,
I'm changing the subject.
oh.
I think,
we beat
I think we
here
did.
too.
yes.
Yeah, we,
Oh, okay, I'll compartmentalize that.
John, you had something that you wanted to say
I think,
while Herb is getting his thoughts together.
Yeah, I am.
so what we said, we're referring to is line 6 of page 26. And it's for the purpose of housing infrastructure, fact, as stated in section 1907, and 1907 is on the following page. And it's just those 3 lines about housing infrastructure, tax increment financing to provide revenues for improvements, related costs, encouraging the development of primary residence for households of low or moderate income. We had an example yesterday that was about a playground that was open from noon to 6 next to a mansion. And I think that seems to not, that wouldn't fit 1907. But I did think that that definition on page, improvements, subsection A of 26 was when I first thought that, I thought, oh, well, there's those towns that have the VORIC grants that are doing an outdoor rec. Like right now, Chester has SE Group, a consultant that is primarily about outdoor recreation, economic development, and community development. And it's like, and I don't know if Chester has a VORIC grant, but if entities are trying to build off of existing intense community goals, plans, this can allow them to do that in a way that sort of goes with the flow, and that laces in nicely. And I thought that the 1907 reference did keep us out of the, like frivolous stuff for, frivolous people kind of realm. But I'm sorry. So I felt okay with it, but it does seem like if the list of things articulated in 1907, or I'm sorry, in number 6 on page 26 is too, like, are we thinking of trying to take it away from the rulemaking of EPSI so as to make things go a little bit more uniformly?
So we've heard from Betsy that they don't want to go through rulemaking because it's going to take them too long.
Too long.
I have kind of an issue with that without creating the rules around how you're going to implement a program, how do you implement the program? And are we just going to be shooting from the hip? So I think that whatever we can do to lessen the burden of having in the rulemaking process to get things going faster.
And so the list you were sort of coming up with is like it's a tight list of like wastewater infrastructure and maybe things like water. Yeah, so the things, so the idea that things like public recreation, what were some of the things that were standing out as being like challenging the sort of tightening it up so it doesn't have to become a rulemaking thing that considers any and all potential use of funds? That's where we're trying to go? We're trying to
So can we do that as a committee? Can we come up with that list? Again, looking at what are the appropriate guardrails for this program, rather than this program can be anything that.
So I'm not adverse to that kind of thing. I agree with Jonathan around the reference to 1907. I think does that. But I'm also not adverse to listing the kinds of infrastructure that would be that could be funded. I think we'll need to add some items that aren't in this current list. I'm thinking specifically water and wastewater and driveways, whatever. That's not expressly included right now in improvements.
Well, I think roads. But
Roads.
driveways.
Driveways wouldn't ever be
would be something that the developer would.
Public good, has to be public good.
Well, I know,
Transportation, but we need to break transportation, roads.
okay, maybe it's actually
Yeah.
included. So again, I'm just thinking about the type of project that would be at scale with, in rural Vermont, it's going to typically be probably something under 10 units with if they're inventive, with a common community wastewater system, common well, that kind of thing, and a drive coming out from the main road that serves, a bunch of pretty modest homes. So we just got to make sure that if we're going with an exclusive list, got to make sure that includes, that the list includes what's needed to help that project get done.
Exactly. What needs to be built for infrastructure in order for development?
And don't forget, with the big hole we have, digital connectivity that we're trying to dig out of and give everybody statewide, digital access, we gotta include that up front in any new projects.
It's there. Yeah, I think, I mean, if you expanded out transportation, actually define sidewalks, those kind of things. Yeah, I mean, I think the list is pretty good, other than I've always been a little bit squeamish around public recreation and public facilities and amenities in a housing development. I mean, I think there's importance for those things. I'm just, you know, why those should be funded to the infrastructure bill. You know, those could be added later or whatever as they needed, but I don't see.
I think it's also to lay the infrastructure for things like walking paths and stuff, because that takes its own infrastructural work. Was my guess.
Well, it was taken from the original TIP program, and
Yeah.
if we're looking at something that is smaller than that, then the list should be smaller.
That's fair. That's fair. But I will also just, as a plug for small rural towns, that like one of my towns is trying to get their trails fixed and they've been having trouble getting funding for it. And this would definitely help with the housing and the connectivity and the general overall. The town.
Yeah.
So I can understand for smaller communities that may have a harder time funding something like that, this could be heavy.
I mean, you know, I'd want to make sure that if we do an exclusive or itemized list, that it's sufficient to do the trick in terms of a project, and maybe the fellow witness that we heard who seemed to know the most about that was Mr. White, because he's been actually doing some of these projects. So we might want to, I don't know, hear from him to make sure that we're not missing something. Not that we
I'm just gonna push
aren't
back.
know everything and can do everything.
Yeah, I will just also push back on the notion that the list should be smaller. I understand that impulse. But the initial idea for creating this like smaller TIF was to help rural communities that don't have full districts. But their needs may not actually change. They just don't necessarily have the capacity or whatever.
And focuses on housing,
And the focus is.
whereas TIFs.
Right, that's like a larger,
Yeah.
like, thing. Yes, this is,
Right.
has a focus on housing. And infrastructure to facilitate that housing.
That's why to me, things like, if we're thinking, but maybe my narrow thinking about public facilities and amenities. Yeah, I guess I'm thinking like, you know, public facilities like, you know, the bathroom at
Oh,
in your park. And I'm thinking,
I'm thinking of the streets that may like be in and around surrounding a development that are technically, like, could also technically be public walking streets.
something. streets,
But you're thinking of actual,
sidewalks.
like actual facilities.
It's not clear.
It isn't, no, I mean, it's pretty,
Clear
it's
it
pretty open. Maybe we should maybe not say public facilities, but I could see, you know, or maybe not amenities. I don't. What is a facility?
What are amenities in your?
And what's an amenity?
What is an
in your
amenity?
housing development?
It is very
right?
vague, yeah.
It is very vague. It's very vague.
Pool. Yeah, right?
I can't imagine that, like, a pool, like, there's a pool.
Coffee kiosk.
Right,
Crypto
there's
kiosk.
Yeah.
Crypto kiosk.
although actually a coffee kiosk.
Yeah, there we go.
I mean, it's commercial, it's, the way this is written, technically, would that be, it would be allowed if there was a house there, or housing there.
Well, again, that's where rulemaking comes in,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That you leave that to the Betsy board, and I think that's, you know, I mean, the more we talk, the more important rulemaking is, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I did hear the testimony from Betsy that they didn't want to do rulemaking.
Oh, they don't?
Well, I think that's,
So they were worried that.
They were
it would
worried.
Take too long, we're gonna miss out.
you know, take too long. I've
And
done a lot of rules.
What's the alternate?
Yeah.
do that to get us at the same place. So we haven't heard back from them yet. So,
I've done a lot of, I've had a lot of rules adopted by various agencies and it takes as long as you want to take it. If you
Yeah,
want
and
to slow walk it, you slow walk it. If you want to get it done fairly quickly, you can do it fairly quickly.
but that's, I mean, I think we're outlining some of the pitfalls that what we put into language of, then how is that defined? Right, yeah, so
Let
the
them,
more that we can close in that.
I
That
understand.
makes sense.
So we're going to stop now. Edie and I have a meeting with someone. Let's plan on coming back and continuing our committee discussion after the floor. Because we don't have anything, or do we have, what do we have? We have
Sophie's coming.
Sophie.
Yay.
On 205?
Yeah.
Okay, so Sophie's gonna come up right after the floor. She's done some work on competes and looking at what is out there for case law. Yeah. And she'll give us that, and then I think after that, we can continue our discussion of where we are. 27. Keep going, so keep thinking and
Helen is also almost done with her spreadsheet on the non-compete stuff. And so that link was sent out last week, I think.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay, so keep thinking and we'll be back after the floor. So remember, floor's at 1.